Well, my concern today is on that grade level, because I have grandchildren that are in grade school that I am very involved with. And I see them coming and talking about history in very different ways. And one of the main things that recently happened, I have a fourth grade grandson, and they seem to be more interested. The main point is whether that historical figure was a slave owner.
Oh, yeah.
So I think, like you do, it's very important to educate at a very early age and give them the whole story, not just one little piece of it. So how do we do this? Are your tapes, your videos going to be visual aids for these children? Are they for the teachers? And how do you reach those teachers? Because they have a particular curriculum, that they have to cover. And so
the only way to engage in this conversation is if we have our own curriculum. And that's just the long and short of it, because you're right, there are companies that pump this stuff out. The New York Times, after all, got into the history business instead of the news business with the 1619 Project. And then that 1619 Project was then kind of injected into the Texas conversation. And understanding, and it's come up before, that this is not really about the past as much as it's about the future and controlling that conversation going forward. So the way that I see to attack it, and I am by no means the only expert here, I've got a whole stage full and a whole room full. The way that I'm approaching it now is to build a curriculum guide that says, all right, this is what you ought to offer in this grade, this grade, this grade, and this grade. And here is curriculum material to support these particular items.
But this would all have to be state approved by the Board of Education, correct?
It does, but guess who's advising the State Board of Education? That would be me.
The Texas Center?
Correct. And so the fact that we've been able to get into that position to where we can actually have our voices heard at that level is pretty remarkable to me.
Absolutely.
Because what's happened in many ways is we've all been kind of asleep at the switch. I mean, we've been following our pursuits, we've been paying our mortgages, we've been having jobs and things like that. But there are people whose full-time job is to think about this and push a particular agenda. And so we've got to engage whether we like to or not. Sometimes you don't go looking for the fight. Sometimes the fight comes looking for you. And so that's kind of where I see us. But through it all, the North Star needs to be honesty. We got to be the honest broker. We got to hear out both sides and say, look, here's kind of an inclusive story. And that's why I think we need to have teacher education camps on campus. Let's bring those school teachers down here, spend a couple of days in Kerrville, then put their feet in the water, come over, we'll go over the curriculum guide, and then they become evangelists. And they take it off to their school districts.
Okay, good. Well, I didn't realize that you had that particular influence at this point, so that's great to know.
Stunned. And guess who the state agency is that's ramrod in the 1836 Commission? That was the TEA. And so what we're building with those documents feathers in nicely with the K through 12 curriculum, which is also being run through the TEA, and stuff that I said this is the battleground as soon as I got to Kerrville. So I couldn't have set up the circumstances any better.
That's great.
Than to have those two key strategic points already within the portfolio of the Texas Center.
Wonderful. Terrific.
Good question, and that's a good one to prime the pump. I'm going to leave this with y'all, and I'm going to retire to the peanut gallery.
Josh, you and I had a bit of a conversation in one of the breaks, and I mentioned to you that the company I worked for closed their Chicago office, brought people down to Texas, and one of the first things that people started asking is, what is this about Texas? Everywhere I go, I see the flag. And y'all are just always talking about, come and take it, and what does all this mean? So I am indoctrinated, and I love to talk about it, and I answered the questions, and I liked your answer when you talked about going to Illinois, but I'm afraid that there's fewer of us as these 20 million people are coming to the state. What are other forums, other ways we can reach out to them to let them know what's going on besides just the children? That's a start, but there's going to be a lot of adults coming in.
Yes, and it was, if that was directed to me, or I'm happy to hand it off to. Okay, I'll give a brief answer, then somebody else can give a smarter one afterwards. Look, it's multifaceted, right? And so one thing that I'll say, and if anybody wants the political breakdown, come find me afterwards, because that's not what this particular panel is about. But I'll put it this way: we can be, as Texans who are interested in Texas identity, Texas heritage, the things that make us Texan, we can actually be very optimistic about the types of individuals who are moving to Texas. And when we talk about the essential qualities that Texans display, which is, however you want to term it, grit, I think Dr. Frazier used, which is a great way to put it, but it's grit, entrepreneurialism, fortitude, a willingness to embrace new things, kind of a classic American archetype. The people coming to Texas exemplify that in remarkable numbers. And so what we've seen in my line of work at my institution, and we're not the only ones, but we do take a hard look at new Texans. And what we find is that these are people, broadly speaking, who are generally ready to be Texan. That's not true of everyone, obviously, and it doesn't mean that we can rest easy and just assume that organic processes will do their work, because that's not the case. The surest way to lose Texas is to do nothing, and then in a generation, it will be Rhode Island or Illinois or someplace terrible like that. We have an obligation to do the things that need to be done to make sure that anybody who arrives here, who makes the positive choice to become Texan, really has the means handed to them to do that. One element has been mentioned is education. The education system plays a tremendously important role in shaping, obviously what children think, what they believe, kind of the inculcated beliefs that they take with them into adulthood. But the other part of it too is a little bit more organic, and it relies upon you and me and our neighbors to do things and to show how Texans live, because this is how people actually acculturate. If we fail to mark March 2nd, if we fail to note cultural events like the rodeo or a Tejano Music Festival, or pretending that we love Selena more than we actually do. That's for any Corpus Christi people here. What's that? Yeah, right. Okay. We'll talk about that later. Then if we fail to do those things, and if we fail to show those things, then our neighbors, our new neighbors, will also fail to do that. But it won't be their fault. It'll be ours. The best thing that we can do is honestly acknowledge that we're Texan, invite people into it. The worst thing you can do is present Texanness as an exclusionary principle. It's not. It shouldn't be. And then show that to them. It is a naturally attractive way of life. And for people who want to make the best of being here, whether they came here voluntarily or whether they came here because their job relocated, it is something that they will adopt if we allow them to do it and if we show them the way. If we show them the way. If we don't show them the way, then it's on us. So I'll hand this off to anybody else who wants to jump in. Please, yes, ma'am.
A long time ago when I met Don, he and I talked about Texas tours. And I think that would be a great way to educate people about Texas. If you have people like Don or others on this panel actually giving the tour, and this new population, me included, love to travel, and we love to explore. And I really think that would be a good way to reach a lot of the audience.
Sorry, can I add one thing, just briefly? We do have a bicentennial coming up. It's only 2022. Blink and it's going to be 2036. It's not as far away as you think. So just consider, if your community, like the state, is just now starting to plan for the bicentennial. But for those of you who are engaged in your community, if your community has not started that idea process, start getting it done this decade, because it's coming sooner than we think. And that's going to be a great exposition of Texanness and the Texas way of life.
I taught school in Arlington for 10 years in middle school. And I was kind of different from a lot of teachers that I've known in the fact that I actually wanted the students to learn the material. It wasn't just, can I get through another day? But this material is important, and I want them to know it. And what I started noticing was that this is the way that we teach, and this is the way we teach at all levels, is we basically have a textbook. We do the first chapter. We take a test. Take second chapter. Take a test. And it's kind of like a race. Can we get to the end of the semester? Can we get to the end of the year and cover all this material? And what I thought was lacking was never the sense of, remember what we learned in this chapter? This is how it applies to what you're doing now. And so the idea of again, which I said this morning, all history is connected, is that we need to rethink how we teach history. And this is why I think the ideas like principles are so important. How do you teach teachers to teach history? Because what I have noticed throughout my years in education is that the content that people learn at universities has gotten less and less. And so you put people in classrooms that know less and less, they're going to be able to teach less and less. So we've got to, again, we've got to go back to the content. What's the content? Content has to be exclusive, not for the sake of it being exclusive, because that stuff matters. How do we take that and put it into the whole story? So I've talked a long point ahead of time, but I think there's a way to do this. And we have to find a way that appeals to people and makes this relevant. And if we can't do that, then we're not going to succeed. But I think we've got the talent to do that.
I have a lot of friends from New York and California that have moved here, and they frequently tell me how great it was in New York or California, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and I always ask them, well, why did you move here? So, and they always say, well, we like Texas. So, but I do want to ask you something, and what I've heard this morning, again, I'm a businessman, I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic. It seems to me that the process you're talking about is going to take a long time. And I don't buy green bananas, so I'm just thinking, you really haven't focused on any other way of getting it across other than through the academic area, correct? Pretty much so, right?
I will say one thing, and then I'll pass the mic to somebody else. My target audience as a public historian is the public. I think we've got to take over or take back culture through the public.
Right. Well,
that history tends to be hereditary.
Right.
That parents pass it on to their kids, grandparents, and so that's like Steve said earlier. We're not going to convince somebody at a university that automatically go, oh, I guess they were right. We should have been listening to those people. So who can we get to? We get to the people that come to the Alamo. We get to the people that express an interest already.
Well, I look at it through a little different prism, and Texas now is a diverse state, not in terms of ethnicity or whatever. Texas is a diverse state in terms of Houston is another state, but it's an industrial state. Dallas is another state, it's a financial state. Austin is another state, but it's a high-tech state, and San Antonio is the military and the tourism. So all those areas have somebody in that area that is very, very influencing, whether it's HEB in San Antonio, TI in Dallas, Torch Energy in Houston, or you name it. And I'm just wondering, from a standpoint that we couldn't eventually develop some sort of relationship with a key business in those particular areas where they could help us with the fact, because people really want to be a Texan. I like the day we talked, I got sent to Brussels at 39, and I was stunned when I checked in the hotel. I'd never been out of the United States, and they said, "You're from Texas? Are you part of the Dallas?" The Dallas program was going on at the time. And every place I went, there were two people that were treated exceptionally, either from Australia or from Texas, one of the two. So from that standpoint, there should be something that we could develop a strategic plan to come up with to be able to appeal to other people to move it along just a little further about how great it is to be a Texan. We're entrepreneurs, we're everything here in Texas. So I just wonder if you'd touch on that and think about it a little bit, because again, I would think that Don, the Texas Center, has the opportunity to move much faster, and the brand they're selling is fantastic, and that's what you sell in life. If you have a good brand, whether it's Stetson or Levi or whoever, you can sell it much more easily than if you don't have a brand. And we do have a good brand, Texas, which is what we're selling. So,
I think one thing that we need to keep in mind is perspective. What we're worried about is the perspective that we're seeing in the public space right now. And that perspective is a perspective of disunity, that we are not a community in which individuals reside, but rather we're a collection of individuals jammed together, and that it's all about the individual, not about the community. That perspective is what divides us. The idea that we are a community, however you define that, a country, a state, a city within a state, that's what I think we have to get back to. That's our brand. Texas has it baked in. Josh said we ought to celebrate March 2nd. Absolutely. That's unique to Texas. We have all that messaging. One of my friends and author, Stephen Harrigan, wrote a 900-page book of narrative Texas history, and he made this comment. He said, when you go to Times Square in New York, you have people from all over the world, all over the United States, buying trinkets in the shops, little statues of liberty and little Empire State Buildings about New York. When you go to Buc-ee's, you have a bunch of people from Texas buying stuff related to Texas. And so it's baked into us. We have the brand. We have to communicate that. So I would encourage, and who it is, it's a very interesting point you bring up, a leading business or whatever. We have to tell people, not just teach them in school, but teach them in wherever you have an impact, that we are a community. And by doing so, we do address the diversity and all of that, the individualness, the unique cultural aspects, that all of that comes together to be Texan. For example, Ms. Barrera talked about this morning, I, Ken Wise, of Welsh-German descent, am one of those tamale eaters. I eat them every Christmas. It doesn't matter what my ethnicity is. Why do I do that? I do it because I'm a Texan. I get kolaches in the morning not because I'm of Czech ethnicity or whatever, because I'm a Texan. And so we capture all that individuality, but people crave community. That's my experience. We want to be together. We do not want to fight each other, just as humans, and certain world leaders accepted. And we have all that. It's right there for us. We just have to communicate that the brand, it's okay to be a Texan. It's okay to celebrate our heroes, etc. It brings us together. It doesn't divide us.
I'll endorse everything Judge Wise just said. Just to be specific on corporate sectors, in our experience, there's really two entrepreneurial sectors that are very interested in Texas branding. One is in the energy sector, so small and mid-sized producers. It's not the majors, but small and mid-sized producers with interest in the Permian Basin tend to be very, very interested in Texas cultural promulgation. And then the other one is the H-E-B empire. Very interested, and they've done a great job at it, by the way. So
there are two others. One
Yes.
is the Cavender stores, which were started in 1965 and now do over $600 million in business, selling Texan all over the state in Mississippi and Arkansas.
Fair.
The other are people like Dean Bass at the Spirit of Texas Banks in Houston, who every single one of his banks represent Texas, a famous figure from Texas. So there might be more of those than we even know out there, because I can tell you the Cavender's people are Texas all over again. And it's an incredible story of what happens in Texas for a guy trying to sell cowboy boots out of a Dairy Mart store with about $100 in his pocket that's now worth that said they do $600 million in business every year. So there might be a lot of stories like that.
Well, it sounds like a marketing survey is in order, a sector survey.
Hi, I'm from Schreiner, so thank you all for being here today and for entertaining Don. So I have a question for Joe Herring. So my perception is that every single individual's history is very multidimensional, as is every single state's history. Multidimensional, multifaceted. And telling that story of this facet and this facet and this facet seems like it can be a really difficult thing to bring that all back together to talk in terms of the overall history and the 360-degree view of who we all are and how we got here and what Texas is. And I know you do a lot of writing, and I know you've done a lot of history research and things like that. So for you, how do you tell a story that clearly is going to have some level of maybe something distasteful, maybe something that people want to celebrate and be part of, maybe something that people find horrifying? How do you tell that story in a way that is the honest broker, even though you probably have your own dimensions that may influence that?
Thank you for the question. It's good to see you. We went to school together. So all history, all stories, or sometimes can be compared to music, in that you have harmonies, you have rhythm, but you also have that discord, that little bit of discord. And my expertise really is the Texas Hill Country. And we have some discord here. And I've tried to tell that honestly and compassionately. And whenever I write a story like that, I'm expecting a phone call from someone who says, my grandfather wasn't like that, when in fact their grandfather was. And those calls have never come. Because I think another member of the panel said earlier, it's in how you present it. I don't present it as I'm angry. I don't present it as I'm judgy. I'm just saying, this is what happened. And that's only, in my opinion, that's the way we learn from history. One of my editors once gave me a succinct order. My job as a writer at the paper is to inform and entertain. Okay? And that may answer your question as well. How do we get people who are moving here from other places, who are not children in school, interested in Texas history? And the way to do that is to be interesting. They would like to read it. And I hope that answers your question, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
One of the things that I'd said this morning was about Star Wars marking a point of departure. And what strikes me is that Texas story, and again, what is the Texas story? How do you tell it? Is the problem with every Alamo movie has been that the story is too big to tell in one theatrical production. What if you saw the first Star Wars movie and there weren't any sequels and there weren't then prequels?
That's a much better Star Wars experience.
But it kind of goes back to people speaking Klingon, and that what you do is it's an opportunity to. You take Sam Houston, for example. Take Santa Ana, for example. At one point in Texas history, he is a hero. Texans can't get enough Santa Ana. What's that story? Why is that? And why then does he change? There are answers to this. And again, it goes back to the, peg it to principles, so that makes people go, oh, now I understand. Oh, and I see how that's happening today as well. But, I think if we could find somebody, if we could get Steven Spielberg and George Lucas or somebody to go, I'm going to do a 6 films on Texas history, that they would be interesting, and that people would come out and they may not speak Klingon, but they would speak Texan.
I've enjoyed everything you've all talked about today, and I'm really excited. Some of the questions have kind of been asked, and you've touched on it, but maybe a little more direct. I've been in the oil and gas business for 30 years, so I work in the most hated industry in the world. And history is my next favorite thing, and there's a lot of hatred in history. And as you said, society is completely divided. And a lot of people are tiptoeing around things, and I see that with my own colleagues and contacts around the world. So how do you deliver a message where you're not afraid to talk about slavery or the Civil War, where you don't sound biased or one-sided, to reach out to everyone and get them to really take it in and understand it? I mean, I see that as a huge problem that's going on out there. So I think it's all about our delivery and what you do, and I think it's going to be a challenge, because we're not just targeting Texas history buffs, right? As Don said, we're going to pitch Texas around the world. So you've talked about it, but another thing, I've been in oil and gas sales, so I hate when a customer asks me when I go in, well, how much does it cost? Well, I haven't even given you my value prop yet, but this is all going to take a lot of resources to put this together, right? So what's it going to cost? How do you raise money? How do you get the message out? I understand how social media and all of this, and I've worked with a lot of foundations, but it's a challenge to raise money. So I know we don't have a strategy yet, but what is the strategy to go out and raise money, and how much do we need? And you need sustainable money to keep it coming in. And that might be something for Don to answer on that part, but
I'll just talk about the first part of your question. It's so important that this starts happening in the classrooms on a regular basis at the majority of schools in our state. There is no reason that a fourth grader or seventh grader should be anything but completely open-minded. That's how kids are. Unless they've been taught otherwise, they are going to be very open-minded about an interpretation of Texas history. And generationally, eventually that will catch on. Maybe not so much for us older folks, but if you can get a good standard of Texas history. There's a lot of argument about whether the 4th and 7th grade is appropriate for that, and if there's too much time in between those two grade levels, but eventually it's going to take place. I happen to believe that there's a lot of school districts that are putting people in 4th and 7th grade Texas history without the appropriate amount of preparation or education, so that they are not able to get that complete story across to the students. So there's a lot of work to do there, but never, those kids will never fail us. If they're given the information, then they will go on to be supporters of Texas kind of thing. But the older generations, that's a whole other thing.
One of the things that comes up is what's it going to take to get this done? But that's a lot like asking how long is a rope? It's as long as it needs to be. So we got to figure out what it is we need to be doing. So I can tell you, to just undergird the operation that we have now, the building we have, personnel we have, the programs that we're doing just now, is we're looking at raising a $6 million endowment. So that's the first step. And then that keeps everybody employed and working towards the goal. So that's the next step, and that's going to be part of the campaign, the Centennial Campaign for Schreiner. So I can tell you that's the first hard number. But what I suspect will end up happening is the momentum will build, and people say, well, now we need you to do this. And so then we'll be on the next sort of phase of fundraising, in order to get that particular program going. You know, to get school teachers here and teach them every summer in kind of a boot camp setting it needs a sponsorship. It just does. And whether it's John's idea of let's go out there and get Wrangler or Cavender's or HEB or somebody like that to underwrite it, I don't know what the solution is. But I can tell you that right now the number is $6 million for the endowment. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to the younger generation, I'm thinking, what are they most involved in? What do they really like to do? And that's video games.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, are there any historical, or is it possible to have historical video games? Is that something that's...
I'm a gamer from way back. I mean, so my gateway drug was war games and the Marx playset. That's why I'm in the history business. And absolutely, gamers, there is absolutely a solution for that. That is a big, big, big ticket item. You can get a phone game. That's kind of the first baby step. But ultimately, I would love to see a multiplayer online role-playing game that rolls out the entire story. You know, instead of playing orcs and elves, or what is it, Bruce? Star Wars seems to be your kick. Why do that? I mean, why can't we have different victory conditions if you're a Tejano, or if you're a Mexican soldado, or if you're a Comanche, or if you're some gringo that just came in from Tennessee? Their victory conditions are a little lower. We brought in a corn crop. Woo-hoo! How many experience points did we earn? But you get the idea, and all of a sudden these kids are seeing themselves in the story. I can tell you from my experience with the State Board of Education, one of the things that we all agreed on was, first of all, I had to play defense, because not everybody in those meetings wanted there to be a 7th grade Texas history experience. And they wanted it out of there, and they weren't happy about it being in 4th grade. So I held the line, and the compromise that I had recommended was that we combine U.S. history and Texas history in 8th grade so it would be tested and show how Texas is the best expression of that first part of American history, the logical extension of it. Didn't survive contact. The SBOE said, no, we're just going to do 7th grade Texas history, which is the current status quo, which I'm not 100% happy with. But the good news is they decided that K through 4, we ought to drop Texas in there at every grade. So the net result is we're teaching more Texas than we'll ever have taught before. And so I think the trends are positive. But you are identifying the logical connection between the education space and the popular space. I want somebody in the Czech Republic playing their role-playing game as, a Coushatta Indian in 1813. I think that would be so cool. But we're a long way from that.